Hey folks, welcome to Tools 101 with DM General. As you can see, today's topic, saws. Before we get started, I want to make sure I emphasize one thing. Safety, safety, safety. Always be safe. And one of the ways that you can be safe is by wearing something called PPE. PPE stands for personal protective equipment. It can come in many forms. For example, this hard hat that you see here, safety glasses, face mask, earplugs, gloves, long sleeve clothes, long pants, safety toe shoes, etc., etc. Even this apron. I will also say this since we're talking about safety, saws. Saws are very, very dangerous tools, especially when they're used improperly. I would emphasize this throughout this video. When you're using a saw, number one, make sure you have the right saw for the job. And number two, make sure that when you're using the saw, that you're not going crazy trying to aggressively cut through something and with brute force. That's not what these saws are made for. These saws are made for letting the teeth do the work. And when you look at a saw, you'll see at the for the blade that there's a lot of different teeth or points. I recommend that when you're using the saw, you're mindful of that and you let it do its job. You see, it's a lot easier when you're cutting through a medium that you let the teeth do the work because then it's able to cut appropriately with the right amount of pressure and you can get through whatever it is you're working on a lot faster. I've seen people try to roughhouse their way through something, and either they destroy the saw, they hurt themselves, they hurt somebody else, or they end up putting themselves through so much work trying to get a simple task done when all they had to do was let the saw do the work. Remember, saws when they first were made were a lot more difficult to use. They were like sharpened stones that we put a serrated edge on, either through chipping or breaking it across another stone or something like that, or we just found it naturally in a certain way, or we used or something else. Saws came in so many different varieties back in the day when it was first used. Nowadays, we've considered safety and a whole bunch of other things, and when it comes to saws, that you don't have to go through the work that our early, you know, predecessors went through when it came to using the saw. So please make sure you're always being safe and you're using the saws properly. And also make sure you're wearing the right PPE. Gloves is a big one to use. Um, Wear the proper clothing because many times I've seen people's clothing save them from a lot of injuries simply because a saw or some sharp tool got caught on the clothing before they got caught on them. So just keep those things in mind. Now, looking at these saws, your typical crosscut saw. This is what you would see like in the Looney Tunes even and all that stuff when they're doing certain animations and they're cutting lumber. You see this. You might see even the two-handed saw where it will be two people and you see one handle on one side, a handle on the other side, and they both are cutting on either side of the saw because the saw is made for cutting like lumber. These are the kind of saws you will see. I would share with you this. This saw looks very similar to another saw called a rip saw. The difference between this and the rip saw is that this saw right here has more teeth per inch, or TPI. There's also another term that we use for saw and their teeth, for saws and their teeth, and that's called PPI, or points per inch. And the best way you could tell is when you take a ruler and you measure up 1 inch on the ruler, on the saw blade, you will see that the amount of teeth or points equates to the what's printed on the saw. And then you have a better idea on what the saw is used for. Usually the more teeth, the finer the cut. The lesser the amount of teeth, the more rough the cut. So always remember that. This one in particular says 8 TPI, 9 PPI. This is not made for doing um, super rough cuts, but this is also not used for doing super fine cuts. This is the kind of like that jack of all trades kind of thing. And I know we are using more of these like electric tools, electric saws, and things like that. But sometimes you will not always have access to power to use those, or maybe your tool broke, and now you got to go the good old fashioned way. Learn how to use these kind of tools before you get out there and find out the hard way how to use them. Learn it now so that way you don't have to work it later. You don't have to learn it later. But this is your typical crosscut saw. This one is a combination saw, so it will give what they will call like a universal cut, which is basically your jack of all trades, like I said before. And this is great for cutting across the grain, right? So when you're cutting, let's just say you have a plank of 2x4 right before you, laid out across. You'll use this to cut across the 2x4. You can also use this for cutting down the 2x4. Granted, because it has more teeth, it will take a little bit longer because it's a finer cut. However, with the rip saw, it takes a little less time. However, it is a rougher cut, so always make sure you're mindful of that. Another saw that you're probably going to see and be familiar with, you probably even noticed it when you were younger watching cartoons, is this bow saw. These kind of saws are similar to the two-handed saw, that the two-man saw that I explained to you before. This is also similar to the rip saw that I explained to you, that's similar to this crosscut saw. This bow saw is mainly used for cutting things like tree branches and small trees. And the reason being is because look at how aggressive the teeth are here. If you measure this with a measuring tape, you will see there's a lot less teeth on this saw than you would see on this. This is mainly used for getting through brush and trees and vegetation and things like that. You can technically use this on dimensional lumber. However, I would recommend that you use a different saw for dimensional lumber because it's a better cut. This is great when you're cutting across a tree and you need to get a rough cut in to get this thing down. I would also say this when it comes to saws. Saw blades, because the metal is so thin, because the blade is so thin, you got to be mindful of the fact that something can bite on the blade, especially when you're using these kind of saws that are used on outside vegetation. If you're, let's just say, cutting a small tree or you're cutting a branch, let's just say you're cutting in the wrong direction, I would always recommend you cut from above whatever it is that you're working on, not below. Why? Because if you cut from below, the medium that you're cutting, the material that you're cutting, could end up cinching down on the blade. Why? Because the curve or the width of the cut that you are placing on that material ends up becoming like a hinge point when you get far enough, and it can bite down on this and you won't be able to move your saw. So make sure that you're cutting above. Let gravity pull that material down, and you keep on cutting until it's fully off. I would also say this: when you're using these kind of saw, or any saw really, this saw works great on the pull and push action. Just like this one, I would say you can see that you can do more with the push here because it's supported on both ends. It doesn't mean that you go crazy though, because you can hurt yourself or somebody else if you're not being mindful. These aggressive teeth can get bound up quickly if you're not paying attention. So make sure you remain cognizant of that when you're using the bow saw. Since we're talking about outside and vegetation, let's continue. And I'll do the outside of vegetation before we go back to the inside, the saws on the inside. This right here is a folding pruning saw. As you can see how cool that is. This ability for it to bend, to lock in position like this is great when you can't get into certain positions or certain locations with the handle fully extended. So you have it like this, so you can cut whatever branch it is or small tree where you need that, where you don't have the clearance to have it fully extended. So this works great in your favor. This is good to have. This works also on the push-pull action. Mainly cuts the best on the pull action. So remember that when you're using this, and when you're cutting with this, even if you're cutting sideways, always cut towards where you want it, where you want whatever it is you're cutting to fall, not against, because you might find yourself binding up your saw. So remember that. And also, you see how this turned this way? Make sure you have the right PPE so you don't end up cutting your hand open. When you buy your saws from your local hardware store, they do come sharp. And I know some people say, duh, Steve. Of course they would. but you'd be surprised on how many people cut themselves due to complacency. So make sure that you remember that when you buy a saw from the hardware store, they will come sharp, and you want to be careful when you're using it. Another outside saw that is great to use is this pole saw, this extended pole saw. This one right here is great for cutting tree branches and small trees, mainly though branches. Why? Because this is on a pole and this is made to get up into locations that it's hard for you to get naturally. So you want to use this for those hard to reach locations that are above you. Um, this also has a shears attached right here for some of those smaller branches that are up top. And all it does is when you pull it, the shears will close in and it will cut the right through the branch that you're working on. And I will say this, like I said before, safety. Those shears can cut your finger off if you're not careful. If you're playing around and you're acting a fool, you can hurt yourself with these. So please make sure that when you're using these, you're being mindful. Also know these shears are not, you know, the sharpest blade in the world. So they can have a hard time depending on how thick of a branch you're cutting. They could have a hard time cutting through. So just make sure you're being mindful of that when you're using it. Going back inside, which by the way, before we get to that, I want to say this. This extended pole saw, this folding pruning saw, this bow saw, and this combination saw, I recommend that you have, if you are a homeowner, I recommend that you have these because you will need these at some point. Maybe not so much this one, but you may need these when you're working outside on your property. So remember that. Uh, Going inside, you will see this used by tradesmen as well. This is a drywall saw. This is a great tool to have, especially when you're cutting out outlets or you're cutting penetrations in the wall. This is great to have because you don't need to pre-drill when you're cutting with this. This saw has a sharp toe or a tip in this case, and is great for puncturing right through sheetrock, plaster, sometimes depending wood. Um, be careful though. Like I said, because of the blade being a lot thicker here, you can put a lot more. You can put a lot more work in it. I would recommend though that you be very, very mindful when you're using this. Why? Because if you're making a penetration in a wall, most times than not, you are blind to what's on the other side, and that means that you can cut something that you are unaware of. So when you're using a blade like this, make sure that number one, you know what's on the other side of that wall to the best of your knowledge. Don't just start cutting into walls all willy nilly. Make sure you know what's on the other side. Um, and what I mean, it could be electrical, like wiring, it could be plumbing, it could be some kind of HVAC, it could be a lot of different things in the wall. So make sure you're mindful of what you're cutting through. The beautiful thing about this saw as well is that it is very, very good when you're cutting and you need to make turns in your cuts. This saw is very, very strong and, how should I say, robust when you're making those kind of cuts. So that way you can actually get, if you're cutting, let's just say an outlet box or you're cutting out a light switch, you can use this. Cutting out a light, you can use this. Homeowners, I recommend you have this. If you're new to the trades, like you're an apprentice, make sure you have one of these because you can use this both for residential and commercial purposes. So this is one great tool to have. Another one that serves both purposes that I would recommend both to the homeowner and to the apprentice is a hacksaw. This saw right here, it almost looks like it doesn't have any teeth on it, but that's because the teeth are super fine and there's a lot. So these saws are not what you would use for wood. You will be cutting for a very long time and you will probably dull your blade out before you actually cut through the wood. These are great for cutting metal and PVC or plastic. I would recommend that you use these for those applications. These are great for your apprentice, especially when you're cutting pipes or some maybe even a thick wire. You can use these for that purpose. And it's great to have because you can hear the tension. The beauty about this is that these kind of saws come in different shapes and sizes. Like this. This is also considered a hacksaw. And the interesting thing is that the nut on this saw that holds the blade, you can take the blade out in this one pretty easily and put a completely different saw blade on it. And it doesn't have to be a hacksaw blade. So I would, just keep those things in mind about different things with these saws. Another saw that I would recommend, well, for the apprentice more so if you're getting into the trades. This is a flush cut saw. This is mainly for those who, let's just say you're working on carpentry, or let's just say you're a flooring guy. And you got to put floors all over the place instead of, and many times our flooring guys will just get the flooring right to the baseboard, and then they would just put a shoe, which usually is a quarter round, piece of trim between the baseboard and the floor, and boom, you don't see anything. But sometimes when you get to places like doors, you don't have that luxury. So you get something like this, which is a flush cut saw, and you can cut nice and cleanly along the surface at the bottom of the let's say the door jab, and you can slip your flooring underneath. This is also great if you're doing carpentry, and let's just say you're cutting off dowels and maybe some small pieces of wood that may have protruded out, and you want to cut it flush. This works great. Another reason why this is called a flush cut is because you see how wide and smooth the blade is. I mean, granted, all of them are, but the reasoning for this is because you can bend this blade along the surface and cut without damaging the surface that you place the blade on. I would recommend though, please do not use a whole bunch of elbow grease when using this. Let the teeth do the work. Otherwise, you're going to find yourself in a position where you break this and then you have to go buy another one. So do not use a whole bunch of elbow grease when you're using this. This has a lot of teeth on it. It's not made for aggressive work. It was made to make nice, fine cuts, and that's really it. And it's double sided, so that way you don't have to be stuck to just using one side, obviously, um, when using it. And this one also tells you which side to keep up, so that way you are better at using it. So remember that. Continuing on with the trades, this is a coping saw. I would recommend this for people who are going into metallurgy, like let's just say people who are getting into making jewelry or metalwork, especially fine metalwork, and even carpentry. There's a lot more trades you can use this for. Those are just the ones that come to mind right now. I would recommend this. Be careful when you're using this because you see how small and thin the blade is. It's not made for a lot of crazy work. However, it will do great at nice, fine, intricate cuts. So when you're using this, remember that that's what the coping saw is made for. I mean, if it helps you, think C for coping saw. And another thing, there's another one that's actually even the bow on it is much larger. I forget the name of it at the moment, but these kind of saws are made for working around certain surfaces. Obviously, this right here, the way the frame is made like this, is so that way you can get this saw in certain locations that, well, if it was shaped any other way, it probably wouldn't work. So that's what it's used for, and it keeps the tension on it. So that way you can do the job that you need to do. Many times when you're using this, you might find the medium that the material that you're working with is technically in the middle of the saw as you're cutting, um, because you need to get in there and make your cuts. So that's why this is like this. It's a very, very useful tool if you're getting into the trades, especially fine work. You want this. Now, going more towards my hobbyists, this is a wire saw. This is great for cutting tree branches and tiny trees, and especially like if you're building a shelter or an emergency shelter, this is great for you to use because sometimes when you're going places, you don't want to carry freaking a full size saw like this one, or heck, a bow saw just to go cut some things. This is what would work great for you. Why? It can fit right in your pocket. And you can use this to cut down tree branches and stuff, make your shelter, so that way you're good to go. And they're relatively inexpensive. So I recommend you have it if you're into that. Now, these two saws are Japanese style saws. These are pull saws. This one in particular is called the Ryoba, I believe. Um, but you wouldn't see that when you go to your hardware store. Many times they don't even know what to call it. So they will call it a Japanese pull saw a lot of times. This one has fine a fine TPI, or teeth per inch, and a coarse TPI, or teeth per inch, or PPI. Um, this is mainly used for fine cutting, and this side is mainly used for coarse cutting. Because this blade can flex, you can also use it as a flush cutter. It's very similar to the flush cutter here, the flush cut saw here. The beautiful thing about this is that this works specifically on the pull action. This does not work on the push really. This works on the pull. It cuts and eats into the meat of the lumber that you're working on through the pull action. And because of that, it's very ergonomical when you're using it. You do not use a lot of energy while using these this kind of saw, which is great because after a while, you'll find yourself using muscles that you did not know you had. So, the Ryoba. There's another, this other one right here. If I'm correct, it's the Dozuki, something like that. Forgive me for my Japanese tradesmen who know the terms. Forgive me, I may have said it wrong. I will get it right. This one right here, as you can see, is very similar to the Ryoba. The difference is this one has a very sturdy spine here. This is great for your rough cut. Well, even though it has high TPI, this is great for doing your rip cuts down the wood that you're working on. Many of you may not know, also seeing the handle, you can see this handle is made for uh, double hand, or for just the ergonomical use of pulling. So that way you're not using a lot of energy when you're cutting.
Hey folks, tagging in here with a voiceover. It just so happened that I received a message which disrupted my audio. However, I will say this, I think you got the gist of the capabilities of this saw. So we'll fast forward to a few things that I wanted to address real quick. Saws have proven to be reliable tools for an extended amount of time, and it's important that we take that time to understand and respect what they can do and how we use them. Always remember to watch the amount of strength you use when you're using a saw. Remember, the key is to let the teeth do the work. You don't want the saw bowing or bending. You also don't want it barely touching the material you're cutting. These are the things that are most important when you're using this tool. Because if you're not careful, things could go wrong in all the ways you don't want it to. So just be mindful. Anyway, that's all, folks. Please like, share, subscribe, smash that notification bell so you get notified whenever new content is released. And I'll see you in the next one. Take care.